So the aim of this meeting is just a quick highlight. We're trying to do, by we, I mean Lanfrica, we're trying to do a thing called like language highlight. And the idea is when it comes to African languages, do you hear that background, Sten? Oh, thank God. Good mics. Okay, when it comes to African languages, there are some African languages that are very popular. So popular in the sense that they have so much data, there are more, people talk more about them. So like Swahili is one of those languages. Even when you come to Nigerian languages, you hear more of efforts on Hausa, Igbo,
Hausa,
Yoruba. Good.
Yoruba.
But there are some languages that people don't even know exist. They don't even, know about them. And the effort, little efforts that people are doing towards those languages, that's what we want to highlight. So what we did is, because Lanfrica Records is able to give us like, with all the 2000 plus languages, this is like how much thing is done on them. And so we go towards the ones that have like as little as 215, and then we kind of created a list of these languages. And then for each language, we try and do some kind of a deep, not deep, but some kind of dive in the internet by looking at the records we have, trying to get more records, trying to understand what's on the internet is being done on them. So it takes us to places like YouTube channels, people doing some media efforts to teach the language. So we do work on the media efforts part. Then we also go to the research efforts, and that takes us to data sets, research, and things like that around that language. That brings us to you now, because in terms of research efforts, you have made, I believe, based on what I've checked, you've made the most significant, dedication in research on things Urhobo. So I wanted to have an interview with you, and the idea is just to understand what's your motivation for working on Hobo, especially, because it's hard to work on something when people are not interested in it, right? It's easy to work on something when there's hype around it. So what really pushes you behind the hype to work on Hobo? Some of the research that has been done. I think here we just talk about generally the research you've done, the future directions, the plans you have for Hobo.
So my name is Iroro Orife. I am a electrical engineer, and that's my background. My undergraduate degree was in electrical engineering and math. And I studied music as a master's degree, and basically my career, I have been using my multidisciplinary interest in electrical engineering and audio to as a professional DSP engineer. So I've been working on systems, professional audio systems for typically making films or making live productions, making software for editing, software for post-production, different kinds of audio production. And then most recently, I've been working on speech and language systems that usually assist maybe the creation of dubbed audio. So for example, if you have a film, the film is in one language. Now you want to say, okay, let's put another audio that has the dialogue in another language so that people don't have to be reading the subtitles translation, right? So that process is an audio production process. And so I've been working on tools, professional audio tools that sort of assist this and make this more streamlined. So generally speaking, that's my career, professional audio DSP engineer, focusing typically on creation of tools that aid creators and people doing audio production. So yeah, so in terms of my background, my father is from Warri side. In fact, Emevo village, which is near Warri. And so I grew up in Lagos, and my mother's American, but I grew up in Lagos, and we spoke Urhobo at home, right? So do we speak Urhobo all the time? No, we mix Urhobo with English. There's small broken in there, just like like many families in the 80s in Niger. Now, for my own self, one of the things that I became interested in when I had my own children was I wanted to teach them the Urhobo that I had also learned at home. Now, the Urhobo that I learned at home was not a, it was a very kind of domestic Urhobo, if you can even talk about that one. It's the one that, you know, how did you wake up? Did you sleep well? Go and wash your hand. Don't beat your sister. You know, different kinds of come back, adekam, you know, meecha, right? Things like small things that you say to children. But of course, I overheard a lot of Urhobo as a child when my father is talking to his siblings or to his brother and his sisters, talking to my auntie who lived with us. And so I had the sound of Urhobo in my head as a child, but I did not master the language as a child, even though I had some small of language at home. When I went back to Wari and I would see my aunties, they would only speak to me in Urhobo. And I remember as a child having a difficult time when they were vexed for me because I did not respond correctly. I did not respond how they would expect me to respond. But at the same time, you know, I was not exclusively speaking Urhobo in Lagos. And so, you know, you have this, you know, same question of, you know, you go to your village versus, you know, yeah, in the city, there's some kind of expectations are a little bit different in terms of, at the same time, I do think that there is a sense in my father's generation that maybe their language is not that important. And that is the sense they had then. I don't think they have that sense now. At least when I talk to my father about you know, Urhobo now, I don't think that he will agree with that. Now, the reason why I say this is because he always will correct my English, but he rarely correct my Urhobo, right? And so he was correcting my English, I believe, because he wanted me to make sure I have good English so that, you know, if I get a job later, they will not say this is a bushman
Yeah.
job. You know, so there's a bit of a, I don't know what you want to say, maybe some kind of a class and education. If you, the English is not English is regarded as the language of the educated. And it's very important for my family that all of the children are educated. And so if you have somebody who is fluent in one language, but they sound uneducated in English, that was not acceptable. And so anyway, Sha, so that's how I became interested in Urhobo. Is when I was a father, I wanted to teach my children, but I could only teach them how to greet and small things in the house. I couldn't. So I went to go look for materials like these videos on YouTube, and I couldn't find them because this is about 10 years ago. So I went to go and find these materials. I couldn't find the materials. So I said, there's no digitized materials of Urhobo other than the Bible online. You know, what kind of nonsense is this? Is this? Am I the first person to want to teach their Pekin how to read and write? And also for myself, I said, okay, as an adult, I picked up some additional languages, right? As an adult, I picked up French because I was living in Montreal. I was living in one part of Europe, Switzerland. So I picked up some French. I knew how to read and write in French. I did not learn this as a child. And now those materials, those reading books, those radio programs, those CDs and DVDs that I could use to immerse myself, right? Those were helpful aids so that language technology played a part in my being able to quickly learn the French language. And so equivalently, now I said, okay, I'm a grown man, I have Pekin. Let me go and see what Urhobo language materials are available so I can be teaching them this when they are small, when it's easy for them to learn. And I couldn't find anything. And so that was very frustrating for me. And when I started to look more broadly, I said, okay. At the time, I was training speech recognition models for English. So I was training models in Kaldi. I was doing lots of language modeling with large amounts of texts, conversational text. I was working for for a speech analytics company that was recording the telephone. So when you hear, this call may be recorded for quality assurance, my company was recording these phone calls, and then we had to transcribe them. So a lot of slangs you hear in conversations between two different people. You hear all kinds of accent variants, Indian accents, Chinese accents, Mexican and Spanish accents, people that are old, people that are young, every variant you can have in the speech recognition task of conversational speech recognition, spontaneous, right? And so I was doing all this work, right? I was working with these language technologies, and I was like, okay, what assets or what data sets are available for me to train something comparable for Urhobo or any other Nigerian language for that matter, right? And I found some materials for Yoruba, and I found some materials for Igbo, but I did not find any for Urhobo at all. And so that's when I started to say, okay, this is the time to see, what we can do. And that's basically the motivation that I had for starting my research project, to start looking at maybe collecting data sets, aggregating data, and then seeing what we can train from that data. And so, for example, the repos that you will see on Niger Volta LTI, Language Technology Institute, is just the organization I have on GitHub, where I aggregate all of the different works I have, focused on languages of the coastal West Africa, right? So basically, that's where the Volta language, from the River Volta to River Niger area, right? That strip of land, that's basically the language groups that I'm interested in. So you have, Ghanaian languages on the western area, you have Igbo on the eastern area, right? And every language in between on the coastal area. And so Urhobo is in there, right, as one of the Edo languages. And so when a couple of years ago there was an opportunity with Masakane to train some machine translation models, I was happy to see that in the JW 300 corpus, they had 4 Edo languages in the they had Edo, they had Ishan, and they had Urhobo, and they had Isoko. And so so one of my efforts was to say, let me train a model. So I used the default recipes, I trained these models, and then I had different family members and people in my own Urhobo community help me with the evaluation of those. And of course, these are typically my uncles who senior me by 20, 30 years. And they all read. So they can read the machine translation output and say, oh, okay, this is correct. Now, keep in context that my own father, who is 80 years old, the last time he had Urhobo language education when he was a primary school student was in primary 1. And then by primary 2, the government canceled mother tongue education in the Warri area. And so even my father, who this is his first language, he struggles to read because his education in the language was canceled since then, and because historically it's been a largely oral language. There hasn't been a lot of opportunity for people to now develop their reading skills, or even discuss on whether this is the correct orthography or not, right? And so I think this is I hope to describe why I'm interested in task. My motivation is more for my own family and collective community, right? And also because I feel like the opportunities for a language that was historically oral only are very great. So for example, if you have a speech to text system, or you have a text synthesis system, TTS system, Or you have even like, speech-to-speech systems that bypass the text phase altogether. I feel like all of these are enabling technologies that can be assistive from education reasons, even having a correct dictionary, right? And so what I think is a factor in this is that since I started working on these things, I've had different examples of my elders. So my auntie, she ran for a long time one of the primary schools in the Warri area called Fountainhead. It was started as a primary school, but eventually became a primary, junior secondary, senior secondary school. And so she's been an educator for like 50 years. She told me that one of her biggest regrets is that she did not teach her children Isoko Urhobo, right? And so, when I see her as an educator express that kind of misgiving or regret, I look at the situation as being one of, okay, we do have real language endangerment, because if I look at all my cousins, some of them speak Yoruba, some of them speak Igbo, some of them speak French, Spanish. Some of them, they did Dubai, they speak Arabic. People, they did Germany, they speak German. They speak. One of my other cousins was in Netherlands, speaks Dutch. So you have all of us, all of our mates. We have been able to learn other languages, but we're not learned our own, right? And in some cases, that language that displaced Urhobo was actually Pidgin, right? Pidgin is the lingua franca, especially in the Delta area, right? And so what you have is you do have language endangerment. And as much as we want to preserve culture, and as much as culture as much as culture rides on the back of language, it may be important there may be some aspects of culture that you cannot preserve if you don't preserve the language. That's my point. And so my motivation at this point is to develop language technology tools that allow somebody to take somebody that's interested in the language to be able to start learning in a way and to be assisted by these language technologies in a way that is much more on par with what we have in English and in other languages, right? Other highly resourced languages. And so I especially think that some of the advances that have been made recently with speech-only technologies, those are particularly amenable to languages that have historically not been written.
Urhobo.
Yeah, Urhobo, yeah. And many languages in Nigeria, they don't have the languages have not, so Urhobo has, like 1 million speakers. And so it does not have the same body of speakers like, let's say, Yoruba. And so, if you look at Yoruba has also, authors like the Nobel laureate, right? Wole Soyinka. You also have people like that have written many books that have in Yoruba that have added to the literature. And so while Yoruba has that literature, Urhobo doesn't have that to the same degree. We have stories, right? We have many stories, but they have not been written down in the same kind of way. And so I think there's opportunities to facilitate, so language technology should be able to allow you to enter and exit a language easily, to go from language to language. You have knowledge in this one area, you can transfer the knowledge easily to the other area, or you can pick up knowledge from this area, right? And so otherwise, you have to basically be co-located, living with a first language speaker for you to actually learn the language, right? And so that may not be that practical, especially as we have been talking about many of my, none of my grandfather's grandchildren speak the language fluently, right? A fact that I think he'll be slightly sad about.
Yeah, thank you. What you said is it's really motivating. Um, and you're right, you know, with a number of African languages not like being historically oral, and now you know, having to now with most of a number of NLP tasks focusing on the text, some of these this might explain why some of these languages have not been um, quite as popular, because, for example, large pre-training, we need large data, right? So it's only the African languages that have that kind of huge text data that you could now see them appearing in some pre-trained models, whereas languages that don't have that huge text data don't you don't see them appearing. And yeah, the story about the, you know, growing up and like having to speak English in Hobo, I think many um, African researchers or people can relate to that, you know, with the trend in English. So some questions for you. So you talked about how you now started trying to do, seeing everything that was going on around the Hobo and the need to teach your kids and to put it out there. You started doing some research. So what are some of the research that you did in Hobo? Like, can you talk about some of them?
Yeah, so the first the primary one that I did was the machine translation. I trained machine translation models and had those and basically ran a human evaluation of those. And so that was published in the ICLR African NLP workshop of 2020, so 2 years ago. Okay, so that's probably the main effort that I have. Separately from that, I have two other efforts, and these are focused on speech recognition. And so one of that is about 3 or 4 years ago, I in this very room, I sat my father down and we did a bunch of recordings. And so there's a spoken digit corpus in English that is one of the first speech recognition corpora for spoken digits. So you can imagine if you're typing into the phone, if you're using a voice IVR system with your telephone, where you tell it the numbers, 1257. Okay, the thing can hear the 1257 and punch 1257 for you. Okay, so this corpus in English is one of the first speech recognition corpora that was built, maybe 40, 50 years ago. Maybe 40 years ago. Let me not exaggerate. So this corpus is basically spoken digits. And so what I wanted to do was make an equivalent corpora for Urhobo. And by that, so I sat my father here. I wrote some code to basically generate number strings. And then I just had like a multi-hour recording session with him and myself, recording our voices, speaking clearly with low noise floor, high fidelity recording, this spoken digit corpora. Now you think, why would you ever need this? Or would this be useful? So you can think of, when you think of the language technology, you can break them down into the application areas. So for example, if you look at banking applications, if you look at assistive applications where you have to generate some number, there are subsets of the full language that you can just use for certain, let's say, telephone or ATM, banking machine applications, where the machine being able to speak the number is actually extremely useful for the interaction, and the person doesn't have to be hunting for so you have that in combination with maybe some small commands that can be recognized, and then that's language technology enough for one application domain. Okay, so the motivation for myself was to record this spoken digit corpora and then use that to train a small ASR model that can recognize digits correctly. And so that was the motivation. Of course, at the end of the recording, we only had, maybe 2 or 3 hours of recording, and a lot of it, is just from 2 speakers. So it's not the most. However, it was a template for me to jump into the corpus creation, speech corpora creation, and to see, what are the roadblocks. And so the data collection is probably something I can reduplicate with some of my other friends and relatives who speak Urhobo fluently. And in the end, I think we can have a nice corpora of Urhobo spoken digits. So that's number one. So number two was a translation project for the COVID. This is something that was run in concert with Masakane, was to get all these translations. So you take the models that we have trained, have them translate the COVID instructions, and then go and do an evaluation of that. So I did that. I did not submit it back to Masakane, but I spent probably about maybe 2 months or so discussing with one of my uncles he's an uncle, but he's not my blood relation. But he's very excellent at writing Urhobo. And so with him and another Urhobo guy based in the UK on Masakane, we revised the scripts, and it was very interesting for me because I'm learning how to write and how to read, right? And connect what I'm seeing on paper with the orthography that has been adopted for this particular case with the sounds that I have in my head of the language, right? And so so that was an interesting task as well. It was a separate task from just training on JW300, but it was more like a more real world application because of the urgency of the COVID instructions. Also, COVID instruction is very specialized. It's medical. There's many terms that do not translate at all, right? All this social distancing, testing, all this other vocabulary doesn't exist, and so you have to adopt that as a loan word. But how do you convert this word into a loan word in the language, right? And so that is another tricky challenge, is that Urhobo's vocabulary, the lexicon is small, right? And when I say small, I mean, by the time you reach 10,000 words, you're already arriving at the end of the vocabulary. Again, spoken oral language. Now, if you look at some language like Yoruba, you have maybe 50,000, 60,000, maybe even more than that words in the vocabulary. And so when you look at a new modern application of the language, you have to have a body, some governance body that knows how to import new words into the language, stylize them with the sound of the language, write them correctly within the context of the language. And many languages have this. France, they have what is it called? Academy. I don't remember the Académie Française or something. Anyway, they have a thing that prevents so-called pollution from English. So maybe everybody will say, okay, we're doing something the weekend, blah 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 blah. Weekend is the American English word, and so Académie Française will say, okay, when you're on TV, when you're on the news, when you're in government articles or government writings, you will not use weekend. You use la fin de la semaine, right? The end of the week. And so by this way, you preserve in some sense the integrity of the language, right? And you also allow customized loan words. And so if you have words in the language that come from popular culture, right? Like a selfie, that's a popular culture. Selfie, okay, right? So you have this word that's been adopted. these bodies allow the word to now enter the language in a more normal thing. They can update the dictionaries officially, this kind of thing. In Urhobo, we need something like, and even in Yoruba, you need some kind of governance around how the language is maintained. But of course, for that, people have to think that the language is important, a part of culture. And with all the other troubles, for many people, it is not that important. It is lesser importance, right? However, on some level, cultural preservation, there is something to be said about the importance of maintaining that, and also in terms of identity. Where are you from? What is your culture? What do you have? What have you to give to your children, right? And so the reason why I'm talking about the COVID project is because one of the challenges I saw was that there is no authority that can tell us how to bring these medical terms that are in the COVID text in English. When you translate them in Urhobo, do you describe it more figuratively? Do you describe it? You just put the English word inside, the medical term inside? How do you adjust it? And so that's very subtle, and it really takes linguists and people who are more experts in the language to do that. And it's not so much the job of I would say the language technology researcher. Okay. So that's the other project. And then I think the final project is that similarly like the one I did with my father for the single digit the digit corpus. I have set up, we haven't finished our data collection yet, but I've set up a similar script for basically collecting high quality conversational Urhobo utterances. So you can imagine, I have, a text file, a CSV, if you will, with all of the different conversational utterances, text utterances, and those will be read by different Urhobo speakers. So I've enlisted a small number of them. I haven't completed data collection, but mostly we've been trying to do this over Zoom, and I just record the call. And so that's why I have the Zoom subscription, so I can record the thing. But that's basically it now. So that way, I also have the video of them doing the reading. But the objective there is to have conversational. So unlike maybe like a book. So I don't want them to read the Bible. Okay, I don't want them to read the Bible. So I compiled this CSV full of conversational text, things that you may say, and I want to just gather maybe 10, 15, 20 speakers. I only have maybe 4 or 5 at the moment, but gather these kind of speakers and then use them to record these phrases, these utterances, and then use that as the baseline to maybe fine tune some, modern GLO-based or VITS-based text-to-speech system. But I have to collect at least maybe I would say 10 hours, 15 hours before I'll feel like, okay, we have gathered either enough data or enough diversity of data. So let's say everybody records, 30 minutes. Okay, for me to gather 10 hours, I have to have many speakers, right? And so because of that, I think is an ongoing project. But my goal is to be able to gather enough data and come up with a proof of concept. And I think that proof of concept, I can now take that to, let's say, for example, in Northern California. So I'm in Washington, in Seattle. But in Northern California, there's a bunch of, there's a Urhobo, I don't think it's the Urhobo Historical Society, but there's a cultural group of Urhobo people that live in Northern California. And, they send money back home now. They send money back home. They are educated. They are making a successful life for themselves in America. And so if I can go to that kind of meeting and show, because they have annual meetings. If I can show other people within the larger community, not just my own family and friends and people who are interested in the language, if I can show them some progress that they maybe have not imagined thus far, I feel that can generate excitement. And especially when you're not reading it, when you can just hear the thing, you can just hear the thing. I remember,
Exactly.
I think that can really generate some excitement. And I hope maybe, okay, those who are very fluent can now also maybe also donate their voices. And so my hope is to be able to get the basic data sets, whether it's the text, it's the text scripts, it's the audio recordings. All of that is open source, and from that, use commodity architectures and some small compute, big compute, to generate something that can now give a nice demo, and use that demo to go and collect more voices, and we can now build. And then in terms of the application areas, everything that I'm doing is I want it to be open source. So if somebody else starts to look for resources in Urhobo, they will not be surprised that they can't find anything, right? They will not be vexed that they cannot find any materials. And if somebody wants to now take this model and commercialize it in maybe one particular aspect, they'll now have a starting point that is not starting from scratch. They can now start and build their own. And so that's my hope. Of course, you have to have the members of the community that speak have to be excited about the language and the culture enough to preserve it. And I think that is probably the larger and the bigger challenge, right? Interest in the language itself. And
So
its
I guess
preservation.
all the things you're doing, like all these efforts you're making, it's also helping. The aim is also when you present it to them, it will also help them, ignite the excitement of preserving and working on the language, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's possible. I think it's possible. I know my own personal self. I was ignited when I bought this book on Amazon.
Wow.
I can't find these papers online, but they are in hard copy books. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's another thing, is the digitization of some of these aspects is very important for the thing to be online, because many of these books may now be out of print, and it'll be very impossible for you to find them. And so the access to the information is now limited. Whereas online, even if the GitHub dies, somebody is tracking all the internet archive. You can go back and see different websites that no longer exist. But however, I doubt that will be the case. But just to say that whether it's places like Zenodo, excuse me, Hugging Face, there are many vectors right now for you to put open data. And maybe some young people, for example, there's some young Urhobo researchers in Masakane, like Oreva and her brother, right? They are working on different tasks. Maybe they will be excited, or other people like them, young Urhobo researchers, will be excited to tackle or give some of their research budget to mother tongue efforts. So
Um, how do you so one of the main issues you mentioned is digitization, and based on that, how do you how do you think one can encourage digitization efforts for some of the works that have been done in these languages that have not been digitized?
yeah, so that's a good question. I mean, generally speaking, the biggest problem I've seen, whether it's Yoruba whether it's Urhobo, and so the reason I talk about Yoruba and Urhobo because growing up in Lagos, I did hear small Yoruba, okay, but yeah. So when I speak of these languages, I'm particularly of the ones that I have now put some efforts in to to work on language technology. So I've done some work with David and Kola Tubosun on diacritic restoration for Yoruba languages. So have some bibliography in the Yoruba language as it is. Okay. The main problem I see for both of these languages and any other kind of language like them is that the resources are disparate, are dispersed everywhere. And so one of the primary things I've done in Niger Volta is to say, okay, I'm going to make a repo called Yoruba Text. All the open source Yoruba text I find or I scrape, I'll put it there. I also list all of the resources for where I can go and scrape further things. If somebody wants to contribute and scrape, they can go and collect the scraping tools that I have written there, and they can go and use it to scrape, or use that for the for looking at how they can maybe otherwise. And so I've been surprised by how many people have now taken that Yoruba text repo and used it to go do sentiment analysis, or they used it to do named entity recognition, or they've used it to other things. For me, I just wanted all the Yoruba text to be in one collection or one repo, so that when I now use my NMT script to go and collect the data, or my diacritic restoration code to go and pull the data set, it can pull it from one location, and that location, the data is guaranteed to be clean. When I say clean, I mean that the text format with all of diacritics have been normalized, and so that you don't have the text, the base character, the underdot, the accent on top as being three separate Unicode entities that now when you do tokenization, they're not tokenized all to themselves, as opposed to one token for that character. And so clean text, because what you find is, if you look at the internet, the text that you find is all different from different formats, as you well know, right? You well know this. And so what I wanted was one area where in English, there's nothing to do. You just collect the text. Maybe you have to clean it. Maybe you have to remove stop words. Maybe you have to do other things. But the text is the text. There's plenty of it. In Urhobo, there's not plenty of text. So there's some Bible text. There's some JW300 text. There's some other, some other random text that I found. There's some PDFs that I need to basically still transcribe those PDFs to plain text. And so I said, the main challenge is to aggregate all of those into one area where we can now work. Because when you're a researcher and you're coming to the problem, if you now have to go and collect from here, you have to collect from there, have to collect from this side, that side, I want to facilitate. Yeah, I want to facilitate that, aggregate all of the data in one location. And maybe that location they can promote that location to Zenodo, or they can promote it to Hugging Face or something. But for my own initial efforts, the main challenge I found was that whatever small resources are available, they all live in different small areas. Maybe in somebody's individual repo on GitHub, maybe it has CC license or MIT license. So MIT license, so we can pull it in or link to it. And so that aggregation is actually a very powerful aspect on it, because again, when researchers come to the repo, or they come to a task, they can at least go where you have some kind of structured data for yourself to now start tackling, as opposed to now turning into data engineer and data anthropologist
and data investigator.
Data investigator, right?
Yeah.
So this is I think one of the biggest challenges. And I think once you can now have somewhere like Hugging Face, you can go there, you can find models, you can find data sets, you can find pre-trained things, you can find I want to take LJ speech and I want to fine tune it on some other, I want to fine tune it on something that I collected for English, maybe some dialect of English. You can, all of that is available to you. You can focus on your particular task. You do not have to build the whole stack. And so I think I look at the work I'm doing as very much like infrastructural and also baseline work. So it's not very sexy. It's not very sexy, but I do think that hopefully for now, but yeah, but I think it can make, I hope that it can simplify the tasks and the adoption of Robo and other Edo language tasks as being more attractive, or basically I can have a successful and interesting research project based on this data. So
thank you very much. It's another thing I would like to get your point on. So NLP previously has been largely text dependent, and as I understand, Urhobo is historically is not a text-based language. So, what do you think about Urhobo and NLP, which is largely text dependent? Do you think there is much leeway in, because the way I see it now, if you want to, in a text-dependent NLP, if you want to try and include Urhobo, you're gonna need to do a lot of things that involve the text. So you're gonna need to write, you're gonna need to translate the text, text things in translated forms. Whereas Urhobo being a largely spoken language, if you're doing NLP things that can work with the speech, I think it kind of makes it easier coming from the language. So my question is, what do you think about the future for Hobo, in a text-dependent NLP versus an NLP that can allow speech? For example, there's a textless NLP that now doesn't require text, can just go from, like you said, or spoken translation from speech to speech, or speech modeling just on the speech data without using text. So what do you think about these advances, paving the way for Hobo to kind of now boost up in research efforts and the like?
I mean, I think it's a very good point. I think that that Robo has more of a chance if there are textless technologies that are available to help sustain the language and promote its adoption. Because what you find is that the use of the language generates more language. So look at Twitter. Everybody's tweeting in English, right? The more somebody tweets, the more responses in the same language they have. And so you have this language technology, even if it's only a communication medium, it's still a language technology, right? I can communicate using language with another person on the other side of the world, and everybody can see it, right? That's a technology. It's a language technology. It's not what we typically think of as language technology, but something, a communication system like Twitter is a language technology, okay? Now, that language technology is, you especially know it's a language technology because it generates more language. From Twitter, every day the database is full with English and other languages that people tweet in. The fact that you can generate so much language from the tool is a language technology. Now, that works if the language has a very developed written expression. And so in the case of languages that do not have a developed written expression or an educated populace that knows how to write, I believe Robo has a lot better chance to become stronger in the future if we can develop textless language technologies that can allow people to, in their own non-writing form, interact with the language, right? And that interaction will of course generate more language. So imagine the bank machine that speaks Urhobo. Okay, you go to the bank machine, instead of typing something, maybe you type something like your number, then it asks you what you want to do, and then you tell it what you want to do. I want to deposit, I want to collect, I want to withdraw. There's simple commands, simple commands. Every time somebody comes to that teller machine and says something, they will speak in Urhobo. That's generating language. The machine, of course, has to record it to be able to analyze it and give the response, natural language understanding. And so all those recordings are language being generated, but nobody has to write anything, right? And so if you have language technology that's speech only, that will generate plenty of speech. And because the whole speech technology of the world is based in text, at least there's easy ways to go to text, and there is an orthography for Urhobo. All the language that's generated by just speech systems will have a side benefit of also generating text. That generation of text can now be used, depending on who's using it, can now be used to strengthen the text and NLP systems that will be based in the language. So if you can think of the language having two different lanes, right now, English has a very strong text lane. The audio lane also very strong, right? If you look at Urhobo, the audio lane is strong. There's no text lane. Only the Bible is in text lane. That's the only motto in that lane, right? But you can imagine if somebody is generating has a speech to text to speech system that's living in the real world, and people are interacting with Yoruba, with Urhobo. That interaction is going to be generating language that can eventually, because of how systems are built today, there's always a text component, can now become converted to text, can be transcribed to text, right? And that text, so now what we're doing as people now become stronger in the speech lane, the text lane will now be growing small by small. And that text will not only be Bible text, it'll also be conversational text, other kinds of texts, right? And so I feel like on some level, if we can strengthen the speech-only technologies, the text-less technologies, there's a side benefit of those who now be enhancing the ability in the future to maybe do more advanced NLP beyond just like the basic linguistics, right? And so it's you can think of it as a virtuous cycle, right? You work on the textless, but because of how easy it is to go from text to speech in our modern world, you can go to speech, you can go to text, and then that text can thereby be now used to help improve and generate more speech, right? And so yeah, but the main thing is that we have to get, in some facet or another, people using the language with language technology systems, which will inevitably generate language. If we're not generating language, language dies, right? If you're not generating language, you're not speaking the language, it's dead, right? And so you have to be generating the language. And when you generate the language, and now that language generated is captured for some application, now you're getting to the point where now you can make use of this for other tasks beyond just the application of banking or whatever. So, and you see this with Google all the time. Why did Google release Google Home? What about Siri? Siri, open the light for me. Siri, buy that thing for me. Siri, do this and that, right? All that kind of small commands, but they're capturing the voices of millions of people. And they use that to now build data sets that they now use to improve their product. But also they take that data set and they also use it to improve their translate product and their speech recognition product. that they now sell on AWS as transcribe, right? AWS transcribe. Google has a speech recognition API that they sell. Those things are trained on data that they've collected through their basically rich data applications, whether it's Google Home or Alexa, Amazon Alexa, or Siri. And so you have these tools that generate data, and then that data is used in a multiple fashions around the not just for improving that same product, but also improving the constellation of products in the ecosystem of that same business. And I think that's the same thing that I'm talking about. So even if you start with speech only, because you can be able to transcribe that to text with some effort, of course, being able to generate language is the most important thing that needs to be done. And if it can be done via a language technology, then I think we'll be on a good path. So, but I think it will take some years to get there. So maybe.
Yeah, especially given that what the big tech companies will always focus on things that will, bring more revenue to them. So focusing on a language with very few number of speakers compared to other languages may not be in their list of to-dos. And then an entrepreneur or someone now building. So one thing I'm learning about, I really like the way you explain like language technology as building as a service that people use. And while people use that service, it generates language. So it now helps generate more data in the language and keeps the language alive. That's a very, very beautiful concept, because it moves the hype around, oh, just generate data, just get data. It's now about creating a service that really helps people. And as people use that service, it now also generates data to make the service better and everything. So I'm just thinking here, and you can chime in here. I guess it's now on people and someone to now think of these services. I think, and I want to get your opinion on this, these services should be something that benefits the language community, of that particular language, right? Or what are you thinking that it could be? So yeah, what do you think about that? Should it be something that's specifically for this community using the language, or can it be something that, as long as there's any service that they can use in their language? This is.
Yeah, I mean, so just to clarify my point about Google, I was giving an example of how Google that are taking this approach to enhance their own business model and use their own devices that they sell. The data collected there is now used to improve other products that are not even related. For example, they use it to put automatic transcriptions on YouTube, which is a value add for YouTube. Now on YouTube, more people will be, I'll come and watch this video because then they have subtitle. Yeah. Okay, that subtitle. Oh, okay. Now when Google, so what is YouTube? YouTube is an advertising platform. So by taking language technology that they've with data they've collected from different of their different applications like Google Home, they use that to train models that improve their transcription, their ASR, and then they use that on somewhere like YouTube. How does that benefit Google? Well, YouTube is an advertising platform, and so more people come to YouTube because they have features that are language technology enhanced, like transcriptions. They now sell more advertising on YouTube. So is the gain to somewhere like Google is very clear when they enhance their products with language technologies, especially when they have a worldwide audience. Okay, that doesn't mean that we want Google to come and put Urhobo everywhere. They may not make viable sense for them and may not be the best path for the sustainability of the language. Okay. Google's interest in Urhobo definitely would be, I think, on some degree welcome, but I'm not anticipating it because they don't even have it in Google Translate, right? Okay. So your question was about, sorry, what was it?
So basically my question is, are you are you calling on people, by
Oh,
people I mean scientists and programmers and entrepreneurs, to work on building services that benefit the Urhobo community? So that's spoken in Delta State. So services that benefit Delta State, Nigeria, and you can interact with this service in Urhobo language.
yeah, I mean, ideally that would be the case. So ideally, so for example, I have a friend who is interested in exactly these kind of tools because of the kind of technology that he wants to build to serve in Niger, right? He has a small company, small startup, and he's working on language technology. And it's beneficial for him to not just serve it in English and Pidgin, but also serve it in Yoruba, Hausa, Igbo, different languages. And so his objective is that does he want to do research in deep pure research in African languages? No, he wants to take a existing model, adapt it for his business case, scale it, and then build an app that can use it. And then that app can be an Android app that everybody can have, or it can be in the service in the phones that everybody can use, or wherever he decides to deploy. I don't know the exact specifics of the technology, but he wants to basically, if you can think of the technology that we are building as a foundation, as a platform, if you will. So you can think of LibreSpeech, LibreVox, all of the different research works from Google and Facebook in the last 10, 15 years, Caldi, all of that. You can think of it as a platform. Upon that platform, Alexa's speech recognition is a direct fork of Caldi. Siri is a direct fork of Caldi, right? So you have this open source speech recognition system that in C++, and upon that you have entire multi-billion-dollar businesses that have been built upon that, adapted to different styles. Okay, we're going to use this one. It's going to be in your phone. You can talk to your phone now. We're going to use the technology. We're going to put it in a device that's going to list smart speaker, right? And so what I'm thinking about is that if you have some baseline models, some foundational platforms, some data sets, these can be used by people who want to maybe have a banking application, have maybe some kind of specialized kiosk, maybe have some kind of something, but it would definitely be localized to where you have an Urhobo speaking population. So it probably doesn't make sense in most places other than Warri. Okay, so that's that. But I'm not saying that people should not do it though. I'm just saying that's where I think it makes the most sense. Okay. Now, how will they use the data and the different? So imagine maybe like by next year I have some pre-trained models. I have some data sets, some small speech data sets. I think these can be. So I am encouraging any kind of collaboration, any kind of entrepreneurs who want to build specific language technology tools. I welcome any kind of collaboration and any kind of usage of the basic data that I have collected. For Urhobo, it's not as much as for Yoruba, but when we finish collecting this ASR data set, I do feel like that would be a worthy contribution. That probably I'll write a paper for this. We'll do all the different things that you do when you release a speech data set, a speech corpus. But how that speech corpus can be used, you can think of it as like maybe LibreVox. It can be used to train or fine tune many other tasks. It can be used there's so many different uses for it, right? And so my hope is that, again, we're basically building a foundation upon which entrepreneurs, people with ideas of how they want to maybe integrate the language technologies, if the tools, if the models and the data sets graduates to the level where they can enter something like Hugging Face, which I do think is a good objective, Hugging Face, and be used maybe common voice, maybe we launch a common voice project. These kind of things I feel like will help gather momentum. And so I think I welcome any tangible application of these technologies. So imagine, in my ideal perfect world, I run a small audio production business for myself. This is not my actual world. This is like if I'm to imagine. Okay, I do audio production. I I release subtitles and dubbed versions of the audio in many languages, and I want to incorporate it in Nigerian languages as well. Okay, so that's one idea. Now imagine I'm actually based in Warri. I run a small film studio. I help do Nollywood productions that are in Urhobo, right? It's not as big, or you can find them on YouTube, but it's not as big as the Yoruba and the other language productions. But imagine now, not instead of just releasing the Urhobo to the Urhobo community, I also provide subtitles in English. I also provide subtitles in Yoruba. I also provide subtitles in Hausa and Igbo. So you can see, just from one small ASR, I can now say, take this media I'm generating and I'm putting out. I can now expand the addressable market for that media. Okay, instead of just being watched by maybe a couple 100,000 Urhobo speaking people, now maybe it's watched by a couple million people, because now they can watch this video or this film. And so when you start to think about, okay, the technology doesn't have to be elaborate. It can start small. It can be in specific cases. I talked about the banking application. I'm now talking about subtitling and media production for watching. Everybody watches film now, right? Like, every week, how many films do you watch, right? And so you can think of all the applications within just the film. Imagine if that film becomes so good that maybe they want to Amazon Prime wants to collect this film, and maybe more international population wants to watch this film. Okay, so they will translate this thing into not just Yoruba and English and Igbo. They will translate into French and German and other languages. But how can you do that? You need technology to do that, though. Abi, you now engage German translator and all these. No, you use technology to make the first pass, and then use human efforts to clean up the translation. And so you can think about how. But the thing is, the model has to first be able to hear Urhobo in the first place. If I cannot hear Urhobo, and so you can think of, okay, this small shop, this small business, they can use the technology to be able to, because linguistic expertise to do that kind of translation is lacking. There's not many people with serious linguistic expertise in Urhobo. And so you can think of the language technology as basically being able to provide a temporary help, right? Until interest in the language gathers momentum, that people will be reading these books more thoroughly and say, okay, we'll study this language. And then you have more expats, and then those expats can now contribute to these kind of industrial and commercial applications. And so I talked about the bank, I talked about the Nollywood production possibility, and those are very, very, very like small. One is a very targeted speech application that the bank teller machine talks to you. The second one is basically providing subtitles for film in your language, so language can have a bigger audience. Okay, so these are very simple applications. I'm not sure, how viable they are commercial. I'm an engineer, I'm not a businessman, but I've seen this exact thing everywhere. When I go to the bank machine talks to me. When I talk to my phone and I go to my bank application on my phone, the thing talks to me. when I watch Netflix or Amazon Prime or HBO or Disney, you know, I can change any language to see any subtitle, right? In any European language and Asian language, right? And so, you know, there are some Korean drama apps where if you where I think, what is it called? Is it called Viki? Viki is an app that you can use to watch any Korean, Taiwanese, Chinese, Japanese drama, and they will have subtitles in Thai, in Vietnamese, in Filipino language, Tagalog. They will have it in all Southeast Asian languages. They'll have, you know, they'll have subtitle full pass. So you know, if you look at if you look at what other people are doing with their own language technology, they're not doing the audio, it's just pure text translation. So you can be watching this Korean drama as a Thai person or a Filipino person, and you can be understanding everything because they have subtitle. We don't have this at home with our own film. So that means our own film cannot travel. Our own film is only localized to everybody. And maybe it's only interesting now, but I do think that if you're a filmmaker and you say, okay, 100,000 people will watch your film, or maybe 5 million will watch your film, choose one. You choose 5 million now, right? You want your film to travel. You're telling stories, you're a storyteller. So that's the reason why I'm talking about these businesses, because I've seen in other domains, in other languages, not even English, like we're talking about Korean and Filipino language. I've seen the power of language technology in those domains just from simple transcription, right? Simple quality transcription. And so I feel like there are some untapped commercial possibilities. And of course, doesn't mean to say that you know, if in Nigeria all the problem where we get, you know, if we don't solve those problems first, you know, how can you talk about this kind of problem when we have other problems full pass, right? No, I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying that if we look at the untapped commercial, everything else being resolved, this is a very interesting area. And so
that's really amazing. That's a very nice the thing you say about like the on tapping into these resources. One thing I remembered while you were talking was something I see in YouTube now these days, like some Nigerian comedians. They now they talk in their native language. I've heard mostly Igbo, Yoruba, and then they put subtitle in, you know, a special highlighted subtitle in English. And so I kind of like it seems people in general are now trying to, you know, promote their native languages and native expressions of things, and now putting a subtitle to kind of reach a wider audience. So I think what you said is really, really important, and hopefully in the coming years in the future would, you know, we'll get to that level for these languages.
yeah, I mean, so one of my guilty pleasures is watching this Urhobo comedian, Parara One Mock News. I don't know. Have you heard of him?
I don't think so.
Parara One of Africa Mock News. So he has an hourly
Wow.
mock news show. I'll send a link, but is hilarious. And he's very I find him very, very funny. And he typically will talk about political news in Nigeria, West Africa. He'll talk about crazy stories. And every now and then he would just stop what he's talking about. Usually, so first of all, it's all in pidgin, right? And then every now and then he will enter Urhobo and then just go. Man, I think, man, I just smiled the first time I heard that, because I didn't know that I know that he's based in Delta, but I didn't know. And so it was very nice for me, because it's a very nice production, very clean, very the audio is very clear, right? And he has a weekly program with millions of viewers. And so I think I went and looked to see at the transcript, and of course they only have English transcript, because of course he speaks in pidgin and there's some English you can see, but if you turn on the transcript, it's just pure nonsense.
Yes, garbage.
It's pure nonsense. But I thought to myself, how nice would it be if the Urhobo parts, that code switching can now be transcribed cleanly for the audiences. Anyway, sure. But yeah, this is, there's so many applications of language technology, so rich, and it provides so many benefits to people, that especially if you don't think about it too much. How many times do I check the dictionary a day? How many times do I, and it's many. When I'm writing, whether it's email, I use this word too much, let me check the dictionary, find another word for myself. All these technologies enable you to do a good job. And I think that that it would be very nice to have language technology parity in our own home and fatherland, motherland languages. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Roro. Do you have any like final comments or last words before we end the interview officially? Any last things you want to say? You did mention the books that was in the beginning. If you want to talk a little bit more about them.
Yeah. So this one is called the Urhobo Language Today. It's edited by Tanure Ajaide and Professor Rose Aziza. Okay. And so Professor Rose actually wrote to her about 2 or 3 years ago when I was looking for from linguistic expertise for my NMT model that I trained. She teaches at Delta State University, Araka, in Delta State, of course. And so this kind of book really, it talks about the evolution of the language, the functions, different linguistic functions within the language, and it has some, some other things about maybe some cultural things like the role of the orator, right? Somebody who gives us, an orator, right? And so the roles of gospel music or different kinds of, so more cultural things. But generally speaking, this book is definitely on the linguistic side. So we talked, there's some articles about code switching, tone and aspect, as we discussed, and basically, the Urhobo language in the modern world. And so I find it to be kind of like an essential read for anybody who wants to study the language as a researcher, just to kind of orient yourself around, the work that has been done, and think about, if you're building language technology, what are the interesting things that people who have studied the language in a less computationally technical modality what are they thinking about? What are the problems that they see? What are the issues that they have encountered? And so that's the one book. I can send you the bibliography to all these books for your own linking afterwards. The other book is this one. I haven't read this book, but my father knows the Professor Peter Eke. I think he also manages the Urhobo Historical Society. He has written many articles on that. That's the website. You can find it at wado.org, waado.org. So that's where you can go for, if you want to name your Pekin, you want to find some better names for your Pekin, you can go there. There's many historical articles. And I have some other books about him by him, for example, on the role of the British Empire about 120 years ago in the Delta area between the Urhobos, the Ishakiris, and the Ijaw, right? Some of the political things that the British were stirring up, back in the day. So so this book again is it's kind of like, this is maybe more if you're interested in the culture itself, as opposed to if you're interested in like food and dress, and maybe you're an outsider, right? You haven't tied wrapper to enter, some kind of marriage or burial ceremony. You don't. Yeah, maybe a little bit outside of the culture. This may be an interesting thing if you want to now study it. Okay. And then the final book, which is maybe a little bit more general, is this one here. On this is a this volume. Um, so is by this very famous professor of linguistics, and he has a lot of contributions to formal linguistics, especially for Yoruba, Kanuri, and Edo. And so there are many chapters in this book, but there's a couple of articles on Urhobo, one notably on tense and aspect in the Urhobo language. So not quite NLP, but about as close as you can get to that. So they also has some other things that you might be interested in. For example, in the section under pragmatics, language acquisition, and lexicography, there is a chapter by the editor that says why we should develop Nigerian languages. And so, we can think of this kind of book as basically, looking at the works of people who have come before us, and thinking about maybe more general. So, for example, that article on why we should develop Nigerian languages, I quoted that article heavily in my paper on the Edo languages for NMT that I submitted to ICLR, because I said I have to motivate. When I say I want to, this is why it's important to to study these languages. I didn't want to just say, as my opinion, no. I wanted to bring heavyweight professors, and I have been studying these languages since, to bring their
Yes.
opinion and their published commentary on why it's important. But these three tomes, these articles, many of them, again, as I was saying, you can't find them online. And so, at some point, it'd be really nice if there was a digitized library of some of these older papers and older publications. I don't know if they're not digitized because of resources. At some point, the bibliography is, you can go to Google Scholar and you can find the bibliography. But if you want to find a PDF, you may have a very hard time to find the PDF for yourself. And so that kind of lack of access, is now a limiting factor. If you are now researching, why should I study Nigerian languages? I must buy a whole book like this to now know why I should study. You're joking. I want to find, because about nowadays it's very fast. Everything is fast.
Yeah.
So you have to, if you can't get the answer quickly, then sometimes you may lose interest. And I think in this case, it's more, certain papers are so important that they must jump to the next medium. So if the next medium is an important book on linguistics, the next medium is PDF. Everything must be in archive. Everything must be accessible by everybody, right? And so at some point, it may be interesting to scan some of these papers and put them in a repository where they can be accessible for younger generations to read about how their forebears thought about studying language technology in the 20th century, right? As we are doing in the early 21st century. So.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Thank you so much, Mr. Iroro. That was very wonderful. Thank you very much for this interview.
No problem. My pleasure.